Claire Cross is a natural to guide us through the world of Mary Cassatt, which is currently being shown at the Art Institute of Chicago. Today, Claire will show us slides of Mary Cassatt's work and tell us her story. I am happy to present to you my friend, Claire Cross.
Well, I'm delighted to be once more back to University Guild. I've come to regard you all as truly old friends because I was just thinking this morning, I went on the lecture circuit in 1976, and as many of you know, with a partner. And I did my first program for you in 1980. And so here I am, 18 years later, talking to you again, and I have in the interim. And I hope it's just our friendship has many more years to go, and I'm sure it will. Before I start with Mary Cassatt, I just wanted to, and I'm sure some of you read that article on the front page of the Tribune. Mm-hmm. It was Saturday. And it implied, and it rather bothered me, that this is a minor show about an unknown artist. And I want you to know, you couldn't tell by me, because I've done a lot of previews of shows at the Art Institute. And I have gotten more calls for Mary Cassatt than any other one I have ever done, including Monet, Renoir, and Degas. But nonetheless, the Tribune article pointed out they expected about a third of the people to come to see it that came to see Renoir. So I'm going to be very curious to see how this happens because of so much interest among the people that I speak to regularly. Well, this is Mary Cassatt at about age 20, and when she announced her intention of going abroad to study art, her father said to her, "I'd almost rather see you dead." Well, you know, those are pretty strong words, but we have to keep in mind this was mainline Philadelphia in 1865, and there was a lot of pressure on a well-bred society woman who dared to become a professional painter. It's interesting that later her father retired and went to live with her in Paris and took a great lesson. So Mary Cassatt rejected the traditional role of women. She rejected the conventions of her time. And when you look at her art, I want you to notice what the subject matter is all about. It's about tradition, and it's about convention, and it's about women of her class at the theater or reading, always doing something useful, not as just passive ornaments, having tea, or sipping chocolate, playing musical instruments. Also, women in domestic settings. This one's arranging a veil, and this one is having a fitting. And then in her serial paintings of pastels and prints of the mother and child, she shows deep respect for the conventional roles of marriage and motherhood. And of course, these are roles she shunned in her passion for a career. She hated to be called a woman artist. She always refused to join women's exhibitions, and yet she defended women. She believed in a woman's right to education and advancement, and she fought for a woman's right to vote. Her best paintings of the mother and child theme do strike a deep chord with anyone who has ever held a baby in their arms. Notice about her mother and child themes that she never burdens them down with sugary sentimentality. Her works were praised by her French contemporaries early on, and yet in America, acceptance came much more slowly. And to give an example, as late as 1954, an American critic and quite a well-known art historian, E.P. Richardson, said of Cassatt's work, "Tea clothes nursery, nursery clothes tea. What robs her, in my opinion, of the place to which her powerful style would otherwise entitle her is her excessively unadventurous mind. Nearly all variations of a single picture, mother and child," and he goes on to say, "it's hard to see greatness in such monotony of subjects." Well, really, this is not a valid criticism. To denigrate her art on the basis of subject matter is really to misunderstand the limitations that were placed upon her in the late 19th century. And I want to quote from a book called Women, Art, and Society. They said, Mary Cassatt evolved within the boundaries of her sex and class, which limited her to aspects of modern domestic life, excluded from the cafe and the freedom of the boulevards. Also, I might add, excluded from life drawing classes, excluded from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Women simply did not go out unescorted. She could not take painting trips into the country without being escorted by a chaperone. So there were severe limitations placed upon the movement of women, and that led to limitation on their subject matter. Well, in spite of sniping from critics, her reputation is quite secure. And I want to point out something I especially love about a lot of these works, and you just can't help but noticing that she portrays the most precious little baby bottoms that I have ever seen. Well, there's been a lot of sniping from critics, but she's had 6 biographies written about her. She appeared on the 1988 U.S. postage stamp, even though it took her longer than Elvis Presley to win this honor. So now we have a major homage to her, a 91-piece, one-woman show at the Art Institute, opening October 13th, closing January 10th. So this morning, as preparation for this show, I tell you her story. And I want you to think of this program this afternoon, as being like biography. One of my favorite TV programs is A&E's Biography. So this is the biography of Mary Cassatt. And what I'm going to do, instead of marching you through everything in the show and saying this is this and that's that, I will show you much more of her output. Most of what I show you, or most of what is in the show, I will show you, but I'm not going to pause and point out what's in the show and what isn't. I have brought the catalog, by the way. So I'm going to talk about her influences, her style, her methods of painting, her friends. You can't avoid talking about her formidable personality. What about her love life? What there was of it? What role did gender play in shaping her art? Should we consider her art French or American? She was born in Pittsburgh in a house her father built, and she did come from the Pennsylvania gentry. This was a class of people, conservative people. They hid their wealth, they worked hard, and they dressed conservatively. She talked incessantly. She spoke both French and German. She attended the best private schools. She traveled extensively abroad. And when I say extensively, you know, back then they didn't go abroad for a couple of weeks. Families would pack up and live abroad for a couple of years. This is a pencil study of 3 Cassatt siblings done in Heidelberg, Germany, on one of these extended trips abroad. We have Gardner, the youngest, who I'll talk about more later. This is Robert, her brother, who died at 10 years old and was buried in Germany. And this is Mary and her father, and the father and son are playing chess. There was also a brother, Alexander, and a sister, Lydia. She lived in and around Philadelphia, which at the time was the second largest city in our country, over 500,000. When she was 15 years old in 1861, she attended art classes at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, which was the most prestigious in the country. Students called it the CAD, and they called Philadelphia the good city of P. This is the academy, the original academy, torn down in 1870. Cassatt's hands, as big-knuckled and capable, and perhaps this is what influenced these hands. Let's look at a few other prints. This is the caress and one of those adorable little bottoms again. This is a dry point engraving. She would use a diamond-tipped needle on copper plate, as others would use a pencil. Here is another stage of that same print, dry point with aqua tint, a little more detail with color. One of her, part of her desire to do prints was to make her pictures affordable to poor collectors. And this is another print definitely influenced by the Japanese print. In that, the Japanese prints, many of them featured scenes of courtesans bathing. the floating world. Remember ukiyo-e, and this was very much influenced by that. So let us move on now. If Ken would change the tray, I'm going to end by talking about her themes of the mother and child. And I'll show you another dry point. Her sister-in-law, Jenny, who married her younger brother, Gardner, Jenny and child. It's an image that dominated her late work and really became her signature theme. They were immediately praised by critics. One said he could not resist remarking. He said, "In fact, I hope she will pardon us for mentioning this detail. Miss Cassatt, who has devoted herself to art as other women have to religion, is not married." Well, what's happening here is that suddenly there's a spotlight on her personal life in relation to her art. But this new theme that she stuck with to the end of her life evolved naturally out of her habit of painting her friends and family and their children. She really gravitated toward children. Here's Mother and Child, a pastel. They're some of her most powerful works. I think they exude this wonderful calm, comfort, and silent affection. And you know, these, all these mother and child scenes do derive in part from those that she had studied and seen in her travels around Europe. She's very familiar with Renaissance Madonna and Child, such as this by Giotto or Filippo Lippi, his tender works. She had seen the works of Raphael, and then this marvelous Luca della Robbia, the Cantoria from Florence, showing these wonderful cherubic children. So she well versed in all that had come before her, and it influenced her scenes of the mother and child and all her variety of poses. Of course, the question always arises, do these maternal scenes reveal her own yearning for children? Well, I think it'd be too simple to say, well, she didn't get married, she didn't have children, therefore she had to paint them to make up for all that. But we have to remember about Mary Cassatt, she was a smart lady. She knew the trade-offs she had made in devoting herself to art, and she did not elevate her childlessness into some sort of personal tragedy that could only be relieved by painting pictures of children. So think of it more as evolving naturally out of painting friends and relatives and with their babies. And also, I've been asked, and this question came up in conjunction with the show, at this time, upper class and middle upper class women use nannies and caretakers. Is that what these are? Well, some of them are, but not always, and you know you can't always tell because she gives them the title of mother and child. Maybe they were models posing, maybe not. Another thing we have to consider is at the time she began to paint this thing, there was a great vogue for mothers getting involved with their own children. Upper class mothers were advised to bond with their children, to nurse their own children. So it's also a reflection of that. So for that reason, there are probably more actual mothers with children than we would have thought. And I'd like to remind you that I don't think it's necessary to be a mother in order to paint this relationship. Because remember, Edgar Degas was not a ballerina, Toulouse-Lautrec was not a Cajun dancer. So it was the mother-child theme that brought her lasting fame. And let's just look at a few more. They are not sentimental or melodramatic, they're modern. And yet they have sort of a monumentality that relates to, as I showed you before, the traditional Madonna and Child. So they're expressions of maternal love using models, and she doesn't fall into the trap of too cutesy or quaint. Here is a work from the Art Institute, and this is a pastel of mother and child. Here's an earlier work, a child of a friend of Edgar Degas. Edgar Degas advised her on this work and even touched up this painting a little bit for her, called Oil Portrait of a Little Girl. And we have a novel composition here. Notice how the composition is dominated by these massive French pouf chairs. And also, when you look at this, It's a rather unusual arrangement for someone's living room furniture in that I don't think we'd ever have chairs this close together, but I'm sure she arranged them herself for compositional purposes. But notice how Mary Cassatt has a gift for capturing that unself-conscious sprawl of a small child who just plops down in the chair and her skirt hikes up and, you know, it doesn't matter. And so she really understands children. She adored Belgian griffons, and she uses them in a lot of paintings. And models were not very fond of these dogs. One model said they nip at your ankles. They're ill-natured, overfed, churlish little yappers. And yet they are a recurring prop. Here's Susan on the balcony with a dog. Girl arranging her hair. This is one of Edgar Degas' favorite works. He purchased it, kept it for the rest of his life. It raises another question about her work, and that's the sometimes homely models. So notice this model is posed in her nightdress, and her mouth hangs open, and her teeth protrude. However, I think rather than being downright ugly, it's a very honest portrayal. It's very vigorous. That's what Degas liked about it. 22 years after the Chicago fire, Cassatt is once more linked to Chicago through this woman. And I'm sure there's not one of you who doesn't recognize Bertha Honoré Palmer, the socialite, the early feminist, the art collector, and chairman of the board of lady managers of the Women's Building for Chicago's World Columbian Exposition of 1893. This is one of my favorite paintings of the exposition by Theodore Rodinson, an American impressionist. Cassatt was hired to do a mural, 12 by 58 feet, for the Women's Pavilion that you see here. And this is the mural, 48 feet off the ground. It's quite an enormous undertaking. She was sort of reluctant to take on this commission, but she actually did it to defy Degas, because she said the bare idea of such a thing put Degas into a rage. He was all upset because he felt it was just merely a decorative panel. Well, she's very proud of her mural, but it wasn't much of a success. She portrayed modern woman chasing fame, picking fruit from the tree of knowledge and science, and they're all dressed in Paris couture. She sent it off to Chicago and sort of forgot about it, and the reception in Chicago was quite cool. She had painted in very bright colors, and from 48 feet below, it just looked like a mass of jarring colors out of harmony with the rest of the surroundings. She was quite busy getting ready for a huge show in Paris, so she kind of forgot about the picture. But when the criticism filtered back to her, she replied, "After all, give me France. Women do not have to fight for recognition here if they do serious work." Well, very quickly, I'll show you two what I call mural-related paintings. This is women picking fruit, and this is a marvelous study from the museum in Richmond, Virginia, baby reaching for an apple. Well, she's very successful now. She's earning a lot of money. She's at the peak of her career. When she's around 50 years old, 1894, she boldly bought her own summer chateau, 50 miles northwest of Paris, Chateau Beaufrand. 3-story former hunting lodge with 6 bedrooms. Cost her $8,000. Remember, I told you France was a fairly cheap place to live back then. It would have been 3 times this much in our country. So her success continues, but the following year, 1895, she had her first one-woman show in New York. But success is tempered with loss. This is her mother, Catherine Cassatt, and her mother died at Chateau Beaufrand. She was devastated by the loss of her mother. She said, "I was so bereft, so tired of life that I thought I could not live." Mathilde Vallée, her housekeeper, filled in for her mother and took over the management of Beaufrand and became ultimately a very close friend of Mary's. Well, now she's at the height of her fame. And I just want to mention once more, one of her major contributions to our country was her influence on and her guidance to American collectors, especially the Havemeyers. Here is a work she did of Louisine Havemeyer, a pastel. She would travel with the Havemeyers, or they would leave large sums of money for her to collect for them. And One thing that you may be aware of is El Greco's Assumption of the Virgin that we have at the Art Institute. We would not have it if it had fit into the Havemeyer's New York City living room, when it wouldn't. And Mary got hold of trustees at the Art Institute, and we bought El Greco's Assumption of the Virgin, one of the flagships of the Art Institute. Here is another work she did of Louisine and her daughter Electra, and both these works are at the Shelbourne Museum in Vermont because Electra founded the Shelbourne Museum. Here's a later work, 1902, The Caress. This won her much acclaim, not only in Europe, but in this country. Pennsylvania Academy awarded her the Lippincott Prize. Chicago, she won another prize. She wins the prestigious Legion of Honor about the same time. Critics were mad for this work. Some have criticized her later works as more busy, more complex, not as simple and strong as the early ones. I would disagree. I think we have her usual marvelous understanding of the physical and psychological close bond between a mother and her children. Isn't this marvelous? This sister is holding her baby brother's hand and kissing his cheek, and then the mother has her cheek close to the baby's. And I think it's a very moving grouping of a close-knit family. Well, she's successful, but that continues to be tempered with loss. In 1906, she suffered another great loss. Her brother Alex, who had become one of the most powerful men in American business, died all of a sudden at age 67 of whooping cough that he caught from a grandchild. Well, she carries on, but the world is changing. You know, by this time, she and the Impressionists are not only successful, they become part of the establishment. Well, you know what happens? As soon as a rebel group becomes part of the establishment, you have a new rebel group coming along to challenge them, what we call the Young Turks. So there was another rebel group coming to the fore, and she began to feel the pressures of a new avant-garde, people like Matisse and the Fauves, Picasso, Braque, Cubism, just to name one of many. How did she react to these works? Well, we have to remember she used to be the rebel herself, but she was outraged. She was particularly outraged by this woman, and I'm sure you all recognize Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein and Leo Stein had a famous salon in Paris, and they supported all this new avant-garde. So a friend took Mary Cassatt to the Stein salon. She thought Cassatt should meet these people, see the art. Well, she describes the visit to the salon. Stein received in sandals, and his wife in one garment fastened by a brooch, which, if it gave way, might disclose the costume of Eve. Once there, the hapless visitor was made to feel inferior if he or she did not show the proper admiration for the art. I have never in my life seen so many dreadful paintings of people in one place. I demanded to be taken home at once. She must have realized she was out of touch with the artistic and culture or intellectual cutting edge in Paris. But did she care? Probably not. Her dealers, Durand Ruel and Ambrose Vollard, sang her praises. Clemenceau, the president of France, called her a national treasure. This is her photo in 1912. Well, all right, now Mary's family's down to her and her brother Gardner, and in 1910, she went on an extensive and exhausting trip with the remaining brother Gardner and his family. They went to Egypt and Constantinople. It was on this trip she finally realized how very little she had in common with them. She said they're utterly Philadelphia. Adding to this, the monuments of Egypt, instead of inspiring her, sapped her strength. She said, I am crushed by the strength and the spirit of this art. She said, fancy going back to babies and women. And you know, that wasn't the first time she felt undone by overpowering works by other artists. Here she sleeps on a boat in the Nile. The rigors of this trip, she was a very small woman to begin with, and it caused her to lose 20 pounds. She became ill. Gardner, her brother, also fell ill, and when they got back to Paris, he died. She said, well, now I'm the only one left in my family. Who would have believed that both my brothers would go so near to each other? And she had a breakdown for 2 years. She could not work. She was in such pain. Well, then she slowly recovered. She said, perhaps, who knows, I may still have something to do in this world. She became well enough to paint again. She became involved in Louisine Habermeyer's pet cause of suffrage because Louisine organized a show of the works of Degas and Cassatt, small masters for the cause. But in conjunction with this show, the absolute last straw happened with her sister-in-law, Lois, and her other sister-in-law, Jenny. She found out, number one, they had boycotted the exhibition, and number two, they were anti-suffragette. Well, Cassatt was avidly for the vote for women. She blamed wars on male-dominated government. She believed in getting the vote women could address the violence of nations. She said, is this wholesale slaughter of men necessary to make women rise to an equality they have never had before? She said, let them league together and put down war. Well, she realized her relatives, the few remaining, had no respect for her, no respect for the advancement of women, no respect for her art, and she began to change her will. She began to sell her work to dealers. It's not that she didn't leave her family anything, but she realized they were so unappreciative. Why should she leave her paintings to them? And she didn't. Life began to go downhill. She suffered recurring cataracts, repeated operations were unsuccessful. Then World War I broke out, coming within miles of the Chateau Beaufort, and she had to move, and her staff was scattered, and she was much too fragile to return home. After the war, she gathered up her staff and returned to Beaufort once more, but notice her very thick glasses, her eyesight has failed, her operations are unsuccessful, and she can no longer paint. So she fell into a routine at Beaufort of enjoying her roses. She had dogs running all over the place, her little Belgian griffons. She also, by now, is famous. She's become sort of a legend. So people were making pilgrimages out to see her, young art students. She'd always been generous and encouraging to young art students. She also liked to take daily drives in her spit-polished Renault, which was a gift from Louisine. Well, she wrote to Louisine about this time. She said, in looking back over my life, how elated I would have been if in my youth I had been told I would have the place in the world of art that I have acquired. And now at the end of life, how little it seems. What difference does it all make? Well, she went into a diabetic coma and died June 1926 at age 83. Mathilde, her housekeeper, wrote to Louisine, I am sure nobody in the world loved her as Madame Habermeyer and I have loved her, and she knew it well. She was buried with her mother, her father, and Lydia in their expatriate plot. So I'm sure you've seen from this program that her passion for art was white hot, and that her modern holy families flow with a love and a family bonding and a permanence. And as someone said, and they put it so well, that she does capture the soul that is there. And so I hope you'll all enjoy the show.